I had this encounter with God where palpably I heard him say, there is nothing you can do to make me love you less.
The Profile. You're listening to Premier Christian Radio.
Where faith comes to life.
Hello and welcome to The Profile here on Premier Christian Radio. I'm Sam Hales, editor of Premier Christianity magazine. That is the monthly publication that sponsors this show and makes it all possible. We've just launched a brand new website this past week. Check us out at premierchristianity.com. Today on The Profile, I'm speaking to David Oyelowo. David is a Hollywood actor, best known for starring in Selma, playing Martin Luther King Jr. He's also been in A United Kingdom. He's also been in Spooks, the popular TV drama. And his latest film is Come Away. We're going to be talking a little bit about Come Away, in which he stars alongside Angelina Jolie and many others. But first in this interview, I wanted to delve into David's own personal faith story. And I discovered he's got a really interesting journey within Christianity of inheriting, I guess, his parents' faith, but then a really important moment in his own life where his faith became his own. So you're going to be hearing that story today. You'll also be finding out why he finds reading reviews of his own films so difficult. It's all coming up today in my conversation with David Oyelowo. Without any further ado, let's listen in. So David, tell me a little bit about life growing up and where did Christian faith first come in the picture for you?
I was born in Oxford, in the UK, and then we moved to London when I was about 2, and then to Nigeria from the age of 6 to 13. And then we moved back to the UK, and it was at the age of 16 that, we were attending a Baptist church in North London, Islington, where we lived and I was growing up. And I realized that my faith was very much tied to my parents' faith. It wasn't something that was real for me. I was sort of, I guess, more a traditional Christian, a familial Christian. I don't know. It was very much tied to my parents. I made a decision. I remember the day it happened. I said, God, if you exist, I'm going to go to a different church because I feel like I'm only here because my parents are here, and you have 3 months to turn up for me. Wow. In a real way. And I remember going to a Pentecostal church in Finsbury Park. It was the one of the only other churches I was aware of near where I lived, just off the Holloway Road in North London. And it was incredibly raucous, very, very different from the church I had been attending with my parents. And I think the sheer energy of the preaching and the music and the dancing and the praying caught my interest first. And then, lo and behold, within those 3 months, I had this encounter with God where palpably I heard him say, there is nothing you can do to make me love you less. And that flew in the face of all of my preconceptions of who God was. I thought he was judgmental. I thought he wasn't very fun because all I wanted to be doing was having sex with girls and playing football on a Sunday instead of being at church. And the fact that the love I felt from God felt outside of the Bible and felt unconditional were things that really threw me. And and that was the point beyond which it became very real for me at the age of 16.
It sounds like you had quite a dramatic turnaround in even thinking about what it meant to be a Christian. I wanted to ask as well, how has faith changed since then? So obviously you went from a Baptist background to a more Pentecostal one. How has your faith changed, developed over time since that day when you were 16?
Yeah, well, like I say, I brought up in the Baptist church, then went to this Pentecostal church. Mostly since then, I've been at non-denominational churches. And I now live here in Los Angeles, and, we go to a church, I guess, that would be identified as Presbyterian, but, I don't even know what that means. I just know I love Jesus and what he represents and the Bible, and I know when the word feels real as opposed to I'm not. And so, when the Bible talks about going from faith to faith, that has very much been my experience, is that I have consistently had experiences and encounters and chapters in my life that have continued to build my faith. And those have not just been good things. I've over the last 6 years over the last 3 years, lost both of my parents, which was incredibly challenging. My dad within the last month, in fact. And, those tend to be the experiences that test your faith. And I have often found for me that they have brought me closer to the Lord, brought me closer to my faith, actually revealed more about how much I have indeed built my life on the rock that is Jesus Christ. And those are the moments that make me feel, oh, okay, this is real. Yeah. This is me, and this is what we're doing.
Absolutely. We're at that point, aren't we, is both in the UK and the US and around the world, where actually death seems in some ways closer than ever. I mean, I imagine in your country, as much as in the US, as much as here in the UK, there's this daily death toll going on of which really brings home the seriousness of life and death, doesn't it? How have you felt in the last month? Obviously, awful to lose your dad, but that sense in which death is actually very close. Do you think that does make you ask actually the big questions of life more than you would otherwise? That actually when people pass away, it makes you think, what is this world all about? And is there an afterlife? Have those questions been, I suppose, quite close to you in recent weeks?
Well, I think as a Christian, those questions are the ones you work through early on. What is life? What is death? What is life after death? What am I here to do? How important is what I'm here to do in relation to, being with God in a state that is far more palatable than what is the case here. I think the thing that has been more on my mind is why. Why are we in the middle of this pandemic? What is this about? What is this here to teach us as humanity? What are we supposed to be doing with this moment as Christians? Because I do, the Bible is clear that in our weakness, he is strong. And I think we all have felt weak and challenged and perturbed and discombobulated. And where is God's strength in the middle of this? And I will be honest with you and say, at times I have felt his strength and his presence palpably, and at times I have remained confused. When you see innocent people, not only the effects of the virus, but also the byproducts of it, the economic fallout of it, what's happening with kids who are not getting to see their friends, and this awful syndrome of people dying alone, FaceTiming with their families. But there are things that have come from this that really, from a faith perspective, have me scratching my head. But I feel God within it, and there are definitely answers I don't have yet.
Being an actor, of course, is something that so many people want to do and is so competitive. Were you always sure that you would make it? And I guess more interestingly, how did you define making it back then? Do you define it differently now, I wonder?
Well, as an actor, I think there are few who truly feel like they've made it, because that's a very elastic statement. What does making it look like? Is it being a critically acclaimed actor? Is it winning certain awards? Is it the fact that you just managed to have a career where you sustained yourself?
Well, you pay the bills.
Through acting and acting alone. There are so many different ways to define success as an actor. I definitely did not just assume I would make it. My dad was actually incredibly against me doing it because there were very few indications and indicators that I would be successful, especially as a Black actor. In the UK, there were when I was growing up, there were very few Black people truly successful. I mean, Lenny Henry was kind of it. And he was more of a comedian in a sense. No, it was definitely something I took for granted. But, I was raised to believe that hard work is half the work. And that was something I always knew I had. And so, yeah.
Do you feel almost a sort of sense of responsibility now, given that you are taking on such huge roles, and given that because of that you are now a role model, as you say, to other young Black people who want to be actors? Are you kind of mindful of that? You didn't really have those role models, and yet you are now being a role model to others. Does that play on your mind much?
Yeah, I'm definitely mindful of it. I try not to have it play on my mind because, it's already a very high pressured profession, to give a good performance, for your films to hopefully reach a wide audience. And so, I basically take the philosophy that I do with my children, which is, do what I do, not just what I say. I try to let my work do the talking. And if it appeals to people, if it reflects who I am and what I value, then hopefully those are things that people feel are worthy of emulation. But, I don't sort of lead with, wanting to be a role model, because, I think that way madness lies.
Absolutely. I know your father experienced a lot of racism in the 1960s and 70s in the UK. Did you experience that as a child as well?
No, I didn't. I didn't experience that as a child. I was very much insulated from it. In fact, when my dad told me those stories, they sort of felt very alien to me. The unfortunate thing is I have seen that behavior more prevalently, more recently than when I was younger. My brother is a healthcare professional in the UK, and in the wake of Brexit, I remember him sending me a text saying he had just got off a train where people had been saying to him, "Go back to where you came from," which was the kind of thing my dad experienced in the 70s. I never experienced when I used to live in the UK, and I remember doubting the truth of what he was saying. But I then heard it from more than just my brother. And, the rise of nationalism worldwide sort of also indicates that this is not an imagined thing. So it's really shocking to see something that I didn't experience as a kid have a resurgence now that I'm older.
Yeah.
And definitely living here in America, it is something that we experience as well.
Yes. It sounds almost slightly contradictory, but I suppose both things are true in that we've had this incredible worldwide movement of Black Lives Matter, and that's been going on for a long time, but particularly since the death of George Floyd, and there seems to be more and more people waking up to those sorts of issues. At the same time, I guess what you're saying is, yes, that is happening, but also the problems are also rising. It's not that one is cancelling out the other, and both are still a reality right now.
I think they're rising, but I think they're also being exposed more. Look, we wouldn't have had the movement we had this last summer if someone didn't train a camera on the murder of George Floyd. Social media definitely has its downsides, in my opinion, but one of the greatest things about it has been its ability for us to keep governments, organizations, and individuals accountable on the basis of behavior that we can prove, because you can show it to the world. Maybe it's lesser known in the UK, but even this moment with this lady, Amy Cooper, who tried to weaponize the police against a Black man in New York, in Central Park in New York, recently, around about the George Floyd incident as well. That's the kind of incident that happens every day. And unless we saw it, the tendency is to sort of gaslight people and say, "Nah, come on, stop making excuses. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps." And I imagine my dad, when he talked about hot coffee being thrown at him or being spat at, in the 70s, there would be people who would say, "Really?" But if that was caught on film, it would be a different thing. And that, I think, is what is really bringing it to the fore right now.
Absolutely. Earlier this year, the magazine, we put the phrase "Black Lives Matter to Jesus" on the front cover and looked at this issue. And I wrote an editorial where I actually admitted to the attitudes you've just explained. And I had to say, I've had wrong and sinful attitudes on this, and I've had a tendency to try and explain things away, and that was wrong. And we covered the issue. And the vast majority of feedback was very positive. Nevertheless, we did have some Christians get in touch and say, actually, yes, I want to be anti-racist. Yes, racism is wrong and a sin, but I can't bring myself to endorse the group Black Lives Matter. And this was a real sticking point for a lot of Christians who were saying to me, Black Lives Matter stand for some very unchristian stuff. I can't endorse this. What's your view on that? Do you have a response to Christians who might feel that way about that particular phrase or that particular organization?
Yeah, I think it's disingenuous, and I think it's hypocritical. Christians endorse several organizations, including the Labour Party, the Conservatives, their football team that they love, or there are several organizations and things that we participate within in our lives that don't necessarily represent the totality of who we are as Christians, what we believe as Christians, and who we follow in the form of Jesus. And, for me, it's less about the organization. It's more about that phrase, Black Lives Matter. If you have a problem with that sentiment, then, that in and of itself, I think, is something to really take a look at. Black Lives Matter, the movement or the organization, is not asking for anyone in the UK to subscribe to their newsletter or the minutiae of what they are trying to push as a political agenda. But the bulk of the people in the streets protesting with the phrase Black Lives Matter as their mantra are not members of an organization. It's no different than marching and saying, "Give us the vote." That in and of itself is not a question that should be up for debate along, in my opinion, Christian lines. Black Lives Matter is basically asking for fairness and asking for that phrase to be true. And the reason people are chanting it is because it isn't yet true.
I'm aware you're now living in the US. What's been your perception of the American church on this? Do you think the American church in its broad sense are on the right side of this particular issue right now?
No, I don't. I don't think the American church are on the right side of this, because I think the American church has allowed itself to be politicized. I think it has allowed itself to be, broadly speaking, more aligned with one political party than another. I think it has made the mistake of being co-opted by a political party, and I think that it has been used for division more than what the church was always there to do, which is to be a unifying element, a place of sanctuary, a place where all kinds of people can come. Jesus spent more time with the ostracized than the establishment. And I think the American church has allowed itself to become more establishment and make people who are on the margins of society feel more ostracized and more alienated. So, I've been fairly critical of the American church in relation and in reaction to Black Lives Matter, because I think it's been a missed opportunity to be a place for people to go and feel welcomed, when partly what's being protested in the streets is the fact that African Americans particularly, but other groups as well, feel alienated and abused by America from a sort of an establishment point of view, because you're talking about police brutality, which is tied to government. So, I've been at times discouraged by the reaction of the broad church.
Yeah.
But of course, that's too much of a generalization. I think
Sure.
the Black church in America, for obvious reasons, has been great in this time and making people feel like there is a place for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I should say pretty much every British Christian I know, me and you included, any experience we've had of the American church, I think would agree with your assessment in terms of politicization. I don't think that's a particularly controversial thing to say, that the American church is a lot more politicized in many ways, and certainly, as you say, many British Christians find that difficult. It works both ways, though. Are there things you've seen in the American church you actually think we in the UK, we could do with a bit more of that? Any positives that you'd like us to take note of here in the UK?
Yeah, one of the great things about living in America is that by and large, Christians are not ashamed of their Christianity. I find, in the UK, people will say, I'm a Christian too, I always find that very odd. For me personally, it's the thing I'm most proud of, the thing I'm most elated about in my own life, and I never shy away from it in my work, in conversation, because I truly think it's a phenomenal thing, and it's certainly a phenomenal part of my life. I think American Christians are more apt to wear that on their sleeve than we do in the UK.
Absolutely. Well, you've demonstrated the importance of faith already in this short time we've been talking, in the amount you've opened up. And obviously, as a journalist, I would say this, but I wish every interviewee was as open as you've been, David, about your faith. Let's talk about the new film. It's called Come Away, and it's a really fascinating concept because characters from Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan have been mashed together for this fantasy drama. And you play Jack Littleton. So tell me, what attracted you to that role?
Well, I grew up loving Alice in Wonderland and Peter Pan particularly growing up. The truth of the matter is I never really saw myself reflected in those stories. It didn't really bother me at the time. I didn't know it was a thing I was lacking. It's not until I've gotten older and I have children of my own and I've really recognized just how important it is to see yourself reflected in stories, especially as a protagonist in a more central way. It does shape your worldview about yourself to have the opportunity to see yourself, I hate to say it, but validated by being deemed worthy to have someone that looks like you, that is like you, at the center of a narrative. And so when I was approached with Come Away, I recognized that, gosh, in playing the father of Alice and Peter, these kids would look like me and look like my children and look like I did when I was 12. And there's real power in that. There's real cultural significance to that. And, that combining the fact that I thought it was a really creative and imaginative thing to put these two fairy tales together just made it something I felt very drawn to.
So give us a little bit of a behind the scenes glimpse, maybe something that happened on set that amused you, or what it was like working with actors you hadn't met before. Tell us a little bit about what the filming process was like.
Well, partly why I was attracted to it is because I have 4 kids. I'd been a friend of Angelina Jolie's for a while. She has 6 kids. We would have these play dates where all of our 10 kids would tear the place up. When I approached her with the film, having joined it, I think that was one of the things that really attracted us to it, was the fact that we were going to get to do this film with a bunch of kids. And so from a behind the scenes point of view, for myself and Angie, I think it was just really fun to get to be around these joy-filled, open, funny, carefree kids. And so, there are moments in the film that are quite stoic. because, we play a certain kind of family and at a certain time in British history. But, between takes, there were just, so many fun moments. I think the funniest was probably the kids. Thankfully, this dance has sort of died down as a popular thing, but the kids trying to teach Angie and I to floss was something I'm very glad no one has on camera.
Brilliant. That's a shame. I'm sure we can dig it out somewhere. I'm sure someone somewhere will leak that footage.
I hope not.
I noticed in previous films, Selma, United Kingdom, when you've done interviews, you've opened up about really what message a film like that portrays. Now, obviously, those two films are very different to this one, To Come Away. Nevertheless, I'm aware that many people, certainly a lot of Christians, enjoy looking at pieces of media, enjoy looking at films from a kind of worldview perspective and say, actually, this isn't just a piece of entertainment, but arguably it's preaching a message, And certainly in the films you've been involved in, those messages are often very, very positive. They're about love, about forgiveness, about unity. So what do you think are without giving away too much of the plot, without spoiling it for us, what are some of the messages you think come across in a film like Come Away, which is obviously intended for families to watch together and presumably for people to come away with a positive message?
Yeah, for me as a Christian, I don't really do films that don't have some kind of message to them, whether it's a message with a capital M or a small one. But yeah, for me, Come Away is really about how the imagination, magic, family, and love can help us get through loss and challenging times. And what you have with this family is a family who go through a very challenging time. The kind of challenging time that unfortunately a lot of families are going through right now when it comes to loss, when it comes to financial uncertainty. This family goes through that. And it's an origin story in the sense that you see how both Alice and Peter cope with this challenging time by going into their imaginations, and you see the birth of Neverland and Wonderland and how that is utilized to get them back to a place of healing. And, for me, what I hope is that families will be able to watch this film and it will be the jump off for a conversation about loss and how we cope with that, and about the fact that you live long enough and that is inescapable. It's more about how you deal with it than whether indeed it's going to happen.
How do you think about a film once it's done? Once it's out as it is now, do you watch reviews coming in? Are you interested in how it's received, or is it more a case of that piece of work is now done, I'll move on and go to the next thing?
Oh boy, I wish it was the latter. Especially when it's films that I've produced or films that I hope will have a cultural resonance, as is the case with this. This is the kind of film I wish had existed when I was 12. And so I will admit, almost to an unhealthy degree, I am very aware of how it's being received, or certainly very engaged with how it's being received, because I work really, really hard to give these films the best chance, whether it's making the film itself or producing the film or doing the press for the film. So I'm also aware, going back to what you asked earlier, I'm also aware that, unfortunately for me, the stakes are higher when it comes to a film's success, because I am a Black creative who's been given a platform, and I never want to give anyone an excuse not to give the next person who looks like me an opportunity to do what I'm getting to do. So yes, I am very engaged, probably more so than I should be, because at the end of the day, there's just so much you can't control once you've finished a piece of work.
I mean, I guess any public figure has to deal with praise and criticism. I mean, you could almost ask the question, which one's more dangerous? Criticism is tough to hear, but then, you don't want to believe your own hype either. How have you dealt with criticism over time? Is that something that's become a bit easier, when people haven't liked your film or when people have been critical? Has it been easier? Have you developed a thicker skin over time? Or is it still really hard when people kind of don't get this work that you put so much time and energy and effort into?
You develop a thicker skin, but I think you need mechanisms depending on your personality to deal with it. Mine has been, I am not good with reading reviews. I take them personally, and either way, to be perfectly honest, if they're really good, you're always at risk of having an inflated ego, but also if they're really good and you validate them, then you've got to validate the not so good ones. And at the end of the day, what I do is very subjective. I've watched films with my wife. She's loved it. I've not, and the other way around. And there are so many things that go into whether you like a piece of work or not. So, I'm not going to lie to you and say that I have a handle on how to handle it, because at the end of the day, the personality trait that enables you to be, I think, a good actor is to be emotionally sensitive and open, because that ultimately, I think, is what people gravitate towards on screen. So it's very difficult to have that be a quality for your art and then turn it off in life. And so, I muscle through, is probably more the real answer. And thankfully in my career, I've had enough of both. Yes. To sort of find some balance.
Well, I wanted to end by asking probably what is a difficult question, because I'm sure there have been many, but what has been the highlight of your career so far?
That is a tough question, because thankfully I've had a few. Playing Henry VI at the Royal Shakespeare Company was huge for me, because that was an opportunity the likes of which I did not anticipate would come my way. Spooks was huge, that TV show that I did earlier on in my career, and the reception it received and how far and wide around the world it went. Of course, playing Dr. King in Selma was massive for me career-wise, but just to play someone of that significance. It was the one role that intersected with every aspect of my own personal life, from a faith point of view, from an activism point of view, from an artistry point of view. I formed and forged relationships on that film that I know are going to go into the rest of my life. So that was huge as well. So I'm thankful to be able to say I've had a few.
Too many to choose from. It's wonderful to hear. David, thank you so much for speaking to me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. Likewise.
You're listening to The Profile here on Premier Christian Radio. I'm Sam Hell, speaking to David Oyelowo. Don't go anywhere. Part 2 is coming up next. Justin Brierley has been talking to Mark Clark, pastor of the Village Church in Vancouver. He's talking about his conversion to Christianity through reading the Bible, why he gave up academic dreams to become a pastor, and his new book, The Problem of Jesus, answering a skeptic's challenges to the scandal of Jesus. That is coming up next here on Premier Christian Radio. Don't go anywhere.
Holier than thou.
Radical.
Delusional.
Ignorant.
Perfect. It's time to challenge stereotypes about Christians, and Premier Christianity is leading the way.
Transform your perceptions, broaden your horizons, open your mind to wide-ranging views.
Read interviews with politicians, theologians, and TV presenters.
Discover the breadth of the Christian spectrum.
Be provoked, react, inspired, and informed. Get the print magazine and full online access for just £4.95 a month. Subscribe today at premierchristianity.com.
Premier Christianity Magazine.
The bigger picture. The Profile. You're listening to Premier Christian Radio.
Where faith comes to life.
Well, welcome along to The Profile with me, Justin Brierley. And today in this part of the show, Mark Clark, pastor of the Village Church in Vancouver, joins me. He's author of The Problem of God and most recently, The Problem of Jesus, answering skeptics' challenges to the person of Jesus. And it's great to have you with us on the show today. Thank you, Mark, for talking to me.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, brother.
I was out in your church, believe it or not, about 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And I just had such a great time, such lovely people. We unfortunately, you were not around at that point, you were traveling, but I got to speak at the church. I mean, tell us about the church because it's multi-site, isn't it?
Yeah,
I know that
everyone wanted to hire you by the time I got back. I almost lost my job, so that was the end of that. Yeah, so we started out 2010 in a little elementary school. Actually in my house, 16 people kind of got together. I was working at a church, and the church very graciously said, "Yeah, why don't you take 30 total and try to start something 35 minutes up the road?" And so I was like, okay. So we just started talking to people like Jesus. I was a skeptic, grew up in a skeptical home, so it was kind of geared towards skeptics, trying to reach people in the greater Vancouver area. And it started to kind of grow and grow. People started to meet Jesus, and people started bringing their friends, and, life change started to happen, which is, addictive, and people started spreading the word, and it got, crazy. So anyway, it grew and grew. And so we had to go to a bigger site and go to multiple services, and then 2 sites, 3 sites, whatever. So yeah, we are multi-site now, and we have sites in Vancouver, Calgary, Winnipeg, and Toronto. So, wow. And then of course, online stuff. So yeah, God's been doing a cool thing across Canada. So yeah. It's cool to see, people excited about Jesus.
It's very, very exciting. How has COVID hit you guys though? I mean, obviously it's different for different churches in different parts.
What's COVID?
Doesn't exist in Canada, apparently.
No, I don't know what you're talking about. We just hang out in our house anyway, all the time. Yeah, man, it's been crazy. So because we rent all of our facilities as a church, we don't own a building yet. We've been shut down since March. We've not been able to get together. Everything shifted to online. Wow. Yeah. All of our sites are like movie theaters and performing arts centers. And so here we are, 11 years old, thousands of people, and we're all just sitting in our houses, waiting to go back to church kind of thing. So, but it's been, we shifted to online, and we've actually grown a bunch, and the online audience, and it's become a little bit more of a global scene. You got people from all over the place who are like, they're like, well, this is our church now. And they're coming to our classes and wanting to become members and giving and coming to community groups. And so it's shifted a bit of our attention where we're actually growing faster online than we are, in the physical locations. You're like, oh yeah, we should probably spend some time and money actually using this as the tip of the spear of evangelism. So yeah,
I guess I'm sure looking forward to being able to resume some kind of in-person.
Yeah. Oh man, it's eventually. You don't get into this job to stare at a cameraman.
Absolutely.
Yeah. As great as he is.
The good news is everyone's in the same boat, and I've spoken to countless pastors who have had to do the same job of navigating an entirely unprecedented, unforeseen situation. But it's good to hear that the church has nevertheless been trying to use it as far as possible. Tell us about yourself, though. You were an adult convert, weren't you?
Yeah.
Tell us what kind of home you grew up in, how you kind of eventually bumped into God and became a Christian.
Yeah. So my dad, the way I kind of illustrate this, my dad was such an ardent atheist. I have an older brother named Matthew, and he said, I'll let us spell his name. I'll let him call us Matthew, but we got to spell it with one T because I don't want to spell it, like the Bible. And then 4 years later, they had me and called me Mark. So clearly this guy had never picked up a Bible because he's trending in the wrong direction. And so he, this was the home, no Bible, no church, no prayer, no nothing. And then when I was, my parents divorced and a bunch of stuff went down. And when I was late high school, like grade 12, guy told me about Jesus, and I just started investigating from, and I, of course I'm doing everything a guy does in high school with his life, so I'm sitting out reading my Bible in front of my high school, smoking a pack of cigarettes, just trying to learn. And then gave my life to Jesus. And to be honest, I had this crazy, conversion experience where he just got a hold of my life, totally transformed not what I do, but what I want to do. And I started just telling everybody about, I was like, well, everyone needs to. So I'd be sitting out, guys would be hammered at the park. I'd be telling them about Jesus, smoking my cigarettes. I'd be baptizing guys at 2:00 in the morning. And before I was ever baptized, I never walked to a church yet, so this is bad. Yeah.
Let me get this straight, Bart. Are you saying you kind of had a conversion experience just from reading the Bible?
Well, and a guy telling me, like, bringing me to that point.
Yeah.
And then kind of discipling me a little bit in the theology, but just at high school as we walked around. Like there was I had no formal leadership. Which might explain a lot. I didn't have any kind of reverence for church in that sense. I was just kind of whatever. So, I just, met. So I went from the guy sitting in a garage smoking pot with his buddies, whatever. And now 3 weeks later, I'm in the same garage telling them, I'm high because they're all smoking pot still, but I'm telling them about Jesus, And so anyway, that was my life. So I started going to Bible college, and the rest is history.
Yeah. Well, fascinating backstory to this. Really enjoyed the book as well. Now, look,
thank you.
I'm gonna be honest with you here, Mark. I thought, oh, Mark, he's pastors a big church. He's probably kind of done a kind of Jesus for seekers kind of, this is sort of the packaged version, if you know what I mean, of Jesus.
Sure.
And when I actually sat down and read the book, I thought, no, this is like properly scholarly. And I realized, of course, that you actually, at some point, you were even thinking of pursuing scholarship, weren't you? Before you kind of went into church leadership. So this has kind of been the result of, I'm guessing, quite a lot of thinking, research, reading, but it's done in a very accessible way, which is great. So what's behind the book? Who's it for, and what can people expect when they read it?
Well, I came from I moved out to Vancouver from Toronto to pursue a master's degree out here at Regent College, and then I was going to come over to you guys and try to do a PhD, and so that was the plan. And then I, I wrote my master's degree, a master's thesis on Romans 9-11, which of course, there's no shortage of things. And after I was done that, I was like, hey, let's go PhD. And the Lord was like, no, I want you to plant this church. And, I love academic. I love sometimes, being a pastor for me is like, I love footnotes. I love sitting in a library with me and words, because they don't cheat on their wives. They don't, they don't drink too much. They're not a gong show, So I'm like, oh man, people are the worst. Why am I going to pastor them? So anyway, so I gave up the scholarship dream, and did, obviously continue in it, but try to bring it into the real world every week and watch it live in the lives of people. And that's, there's something about that you can't get away from once you see it start to really impact people's lives. So
I was going to ask though, like, when you move from the scholarship, sitting in the library and reading, the Victory of the Son of God or whatever from N.T. Wright, 1,000+ pages, and you're moving like to talking to someone who maybe just walked across the threshold of your church, which is what you're doing a lot of the time with the village church. How does that level of scholarship translate into what you actually say to someone who may not even really know anything about Jesus? Yeah,
well, what I've found is, obviously, as a preacher, you can't bring everybody into the library with you. You got to go in yourself and then come out, dust yourself off, and tell them what you found, and then tell them what it has to do with the fact that they can't, what are they thinking about, right? Like, one of the things that people forget is, especially in our cultures, people aren't just wondering if Christianity is true, they're wondering whether it works. Does it work to change my marriage? Because my marriage is a gong show, my kids are a gong show, my budget's a gong show, my work sucks, I hate my boss. That's what most people are dealing with. And we get up and let's talk about, and it's like, well, no, you got to bring what you found in there and then make it live in their life. And so anyway, I have found that if you do the hard work yourself and then bring it out and kind of show them the tip of the iceberg, what they want to do is they know that there's more underneath. They can sense it when you're preaching. They're going, okay, he's got something here and he's giving it to me. He's giving me kind of the tip here. And so and then what I found is people, once they start engaging those ideas, the big thing that happens is they start to go, Right. I never thought of it that way before.
Mhm.
Oh, I never thought of it. So that's what scholarship has done for me. It's been able to kind of take an angle on something that maybe the regular Joe, even the regular Joe who grew up in church, maybe they never thought of this. And now let me spin it for them that way. And then let me unpack what it has to do with their life. So anyway,
and that's why, I mean, we're talking here about the problem of Jesus, which is subtitled Answering Skeptics' Challenges. But I do get the sense that it's written as much for Christians who want to kind of understand the person of Jesus more than perhaps they have. Because I think a lot of Christians grow up with a certain idealized church view of Jesus.
Yes.
And I think even, in the opening chapters, you kind of ask some significant questions about how we got the Bible, how it represents the words of Jesus, some uncomfortable things that some Christians won't have realized of how the Bible came together and how we understand the kind of genre of the stories of Jesus' life, the Gospels and so on.
Yeah.
So in a way, you're kind of, I feel like you're asking Christians to reconsider the way they think about Jesus as a historical person, as much as you're hoping to answer some of the skeptical challenges too.
Yeah. I tried to, I try to look, because of my background. I tried to fuse together both those worlds. How do you write a book for skeptics and believers that are going to challenge the skeptic to say, Jesus is the best idea in the marketplace of ideas, and then the believer who thinks they know Jesus, like in the introduction where I talk about, the scandal, the confrontation, we pitch him as Mr. Rogers meets Tony Robbins or whatever. Right. And it's like, who would have killed that guy? Nobody. Oftentimes we make Jesus in our own image, and he's nothing but some, pithy sayings, nice little things he's talking about, telling earthly stories with heavenly meanings, all this kind of stuff. And it's like, he dies as a revolutionary against the empire. He's Luke Skywalker, man. He's fighting the empire. He's not walking around just talking about seeds and birds. I mean, when he is, these are subversive stories. Yeah. This isn't just nice little stories to knit on a thing. This is like real. Yeah. I got to reframe God, salvation, Israel, the kingdom, yourself, joy. I'm redefining everything you knew about everything. And you're going to either accept it or you're going to deny it. But there's not this middle of the road option of, well, Jesus is cool. He's a nice guy. He's a good leader. He's an archetype for sacrifice and love. And it's like, that's not a thing. Yeah, that's okay. So moving from sort of maybe some of the unhelpful impressions that Christians sometimes pick up from Christian culture, even about Jesus, what are the kind of the key objections you encounter from skeptics when you start to talk to them about Jesus? I mean, do you find they also suffer from a pretty poor understanding picture of Jesus? Yeah, I think both. I think you see a generation of people right now who are leaving the church, right? And they're leaving it sometimes for the same reason skeptics never came into it. And it's like, there's stuff that I don't like about the hypocrisy of the church, or Christian nationalism, or racism, or sexuality, whatever it is. And, what I try to do is like, okay, let's clear away some of that. And actually, let's just look at Jesus, because don't reject Christianity based on Christians trying to, and just fumbling to try to follow Jesus. You got to clear away that and look at Jesus. And that's what I'm trying to do in the book. What if when we actually look at him, he doesn't carry any of that. It's Christians trying to follow him. And, there's this concept that I talk to my church about often, because I deal with a lot of people who want to leave the church. And I think it was Solzhenitsyn gave an image years ago where he talked about if I'm trying to find my way home, and I say, where is it? And you point down a pathway, but I'm walking along it drunkenly. It doesn't mean it's the wrong way. It just means I'm hammered, And so it's like, don't reject the way because Christians are, fumbling along the path, So I find that skeptics and Christians are denying Jesus based on stuff that has nothing to do with Jesus. It has to do with a bad version of Christianity that we've come up with after 2,000 years of doing our best to figure this thing out.
Yeah.
And so let's clear that away and deal with, okay, what is he saying? What is he calling us to?
Yeah. Well, you do such a good job in the book of kind of dealing with the kind of historical case for Jesus, and being very upfront about what the limitations are as well of what we can know, but the way we're meant to understand and the way this has been dealt with in the church historically. But I suppose, a lot of that leads me, particularly for the skeptic, to say, okay, so you've got, say, a skeptic who's kind of intrigued by the person of Jesus. Maybe they did grow up with some misconceptions, and the book manages to clear some of those up. But kind of how much do you need to know? How much kind of do you have to have kind of the historical evidence in place before you can kind of make, I suppose, that leap of faith? And I don't want to kind of, I don't like, the dichotomy between faith and reason. I think they go together, as I'm sure you do. But nonetheless, there's a point at which you have to say, I'm probably not going to have all the answers I want to everything, but I'm going to trust this. And how do you bring people to that point? What's the kind of thing that needs to happen to move it from just, I'm interested in the intellectual, historical Jesus to actually, this could be a real being who changes my life.
Right. Yeah. I think, as we've kind of been alluding to, you got the, how are we going to know anything about him? It's going to be a Gospels thing, right? So can we trust, when I first became a Christian, it was like, Augustine said the Bible is the face of God for us now. And it's like, I really encountered Jesus in the scriptures. And I was like, this, but so now we got to trust those. So I remember, reading, there was a parable in Luke I read one day. And then I was like, I thought I read that in Matthew. And I went over to Matthew and I read it, and I compared these two parables, and there was differences in them. And I lost my mind. I was like, oh my gosh, these guys made this up. Because when Luke says it, there's two masters, and when Matthew said it, there was one, or there was three birds. I forget the exact scenario, but the seeds or the birds or the masters, something was off, and I was like, forget it, and kind of and then I started, and I talk about this in the book. I started, actually reading scholars that pointed out the fact that Jesus, you gotta don't throw away Christianity based on your terrible 21st century ideas about what the gospel writers should be doing. This guy had a 3-year ministry. So he's walking around Galilee telling these stories. He probably told them 250 times. If you had a tape recorder, you would have taped him doing the one with the two masters, and one took that one that he did on a Wednesday, and Luke took the one he later. What this is, we project all of these things. And I remember, just to be humble here, why am I projecting all my ideas about Christianity onto a text? These guys can formulate topics if they want. You go to the Gospel of Mark, all of his parables are in chapter 4. We look, oh my goodness, I guess Mark's doing a thing here. It's like, no, that's what they were allowed to do. This was what the genre of first century biography that melded together, Greco-Roman ideas and Jewish storytelling together in this thing where they were allowed to shift information around to make theological points. They were allowed to have all these things. So it caused me to go, okay, I got to take a breather here and judge this genre based on its thing, not my thing, projecting it on. And I find that skeptics, once you explain things like that to them,
a lot of the objections just kind of disappear, I find, at that point, because if the problem is, I think you're right, Mark, and I think the problem has been that the church has often held up a specific view of scripture that is, it's easy then for a skeptic to shoot down, because I'm just going to line up two passages and show that there's some kind of problem with that. Right. but it wasn't ever a problem to start with, because, those were not the, sort of the, genre rules that they were interested in at that point. And I find a lot of those supposed contradictions things just go away the moment you realize there was this license to deal with the text in that way. Now, of course, the problem then for the skeptic is, well, is that shady? Is that like, does that suggest they were just making stuff up, basically?
Right,
If they were
right.
willing to reorganize and, their material and so on. So where do you go with that?
No, because, oh man. Okay. So remember I'm in the book where I talked about Lewis and C.S. Lewis, and he says all these German scholars, are like, oh, this is just romance literature. These are just made up stories. And he's like, guys, I can't trust you because you're German scholars who've only spent all this time in your life dealing with the Gospels. He's like, I've spent my whole life dealing with romance, true mythology, and this ain't nothing like it. It's because you're too close to gospel study that I can't trust that you know right, because you never read Beowulf in the original, whatever. So I think I was watching. You get over there, the People versus O.J. Simpson. Have you ever seen? Okay,
yeah, I watched that. Yeah,
did you watch it? Okay,
yeah.
So here's what hit me the other day. So when you watch the People versus O.J. Simpson, of course, it's trying to tell this story about O.J. and his trial in 94 is when he, when the murders happened. Okay, so but the whole show opens with the beating of Rodney King and the subsequent protests and riots in LA in 92. And you're like, why are they starting the show with this? And it's because they're trying to give context politically, emotionally to the trial. It's saying, here's why this guy is going to end up being innocent in the end. Here's why jurors are going to find him, they're going to say he can get off because this seemingly disconnected thing was the context of this trial. And I find this is what the gospel writers are doing. They're not just giving us information. They're giving us the meaning of the information. They're giving us the context of it. And that's why they can shift it around or do this or that. Like one of the examples, which obviously isn't that controversial, but I talk about how, in John 3:16, we have them all red letters. And, Jesus, of course, says, for God so loved the world, in most of our Bibles, but there was no red letters in the original. There was no quotation marks. And most scholars actually think by the time that text is said, that's just John's commentary on what Jesus has just said. Well, most people, oh my goodness, Jesus didn't say for God so loved the world. It's like, no, John's saying it, so it's really understanding that they have the ability and flexibility to do these things that, like you said, now some of the skepticism starts to go away. And we start to look and go, okay, I got to trust these documents is my point, coming back to your original question. And if we trust the documents, which I think we can based on archaeology and the leaders that they talk about and all the historical data that's been done on digging up coins, that, all of that. Then we start to work backwards from, things you talk about all the time, the resurrection and all that stuff. And if that stuff starts to ring true, now I got to evaluate what are the real reasons I'm rejecting this. What are the reasons behind the reasons? Is it because I'm, like I like to say to my church on Easter, my church doubles in size on Easter. And, because a bunch of people show up that their family invited. And I love to challenge them a bit and say, look, here's the reason you're not going to come back here next week. Because you came here. I'm glad you put your nice slacks on. You came because grandma asked you to come, and you're going to go back and eat ham or whatever this afternoon, whatever you do. And that's great. But here's the problem. The reason that you're not going to believe in Jesus today is not because you're smarter than everybody in this room. It's because you're a coward. It's because you're afraid of what your coworker is going to say if you give your life to Jesus today, what your girlfriend's going to say, what your husband's going to say. That's why you won't believe. You want to hold on to your control in life. You want to hold on to what's comfortable for you and what you know. And what I'm trying to get at is, let's not all pretend skeptics are skeptics because they're just so much smarter than everybody else. There are reasons behind reasons. And I want to try to get at those and go, I'm not telling you this is what I'm just telling you, at least do some evaluation on yourself and evaluate your real reasons why you might be rejecting this.
Yeah. And I think that's true. And I think the best skeptics are skeptical of their own skepticism in that
Sure,
sense, and
yeah.
they're willing to see that we all suffer from confirmation bias. We all have a worldview that we're not going to give up easily necessarily, and there's going to be, and I totally agree. I think what's often presented ostensibly as intellectual objections can often be being used as a sort of a mask for other kinds of actual, what the real objections often are underneath. But having said all that, there's still what we're inviting people to when we invite them to a relationship with Jesus is not a historical person exactly, is it? As much as we might want to show the historical foundations for this person, it is for something that is ultimately quite mysterious. So, and I think you deal with that quite well in the book, that we can't just rationalize everything. We don't invite people into a kind of a rational thing.
Right.
Ultimately, it's not
Right.
irrational, but it's not just some kind of logical,
Sure.
argument that people accept.
Yeah, it's I talk about a little bit in the parables chapter, in the discipleship chapter, the concept of like this, we are what we love kind of idea, right? The at some level we get changed not just by cognitive information, but by our affections. That's actually the most powerful thing about us, right? Is the decisions we make in life are driven not by what's always true, but what glitters, what feels good. And I talk about the concept, like the mall doesn't try to get you by your logic. It gets you by your gut, your feelings, right? And so Christianity needs to be able to, and it does, of course, appeal and fulfill that part of ourselves too, where it, at the end of the day, is about our joy. Jesus is saying, I have a plan of how to make true joy in your life, not just for 80 years, but 80 billion. And the question is, are you willing to, during your 80, go, I'm not just a thinking creature. I make decisions. Look, I've been a pastor for 20 years. And believe it or not, looking at me. And when I do marriage counseling, I will sit with a couple and I'll do premarital counseling with them. And they will say, and I'll be like, guys, you guys are not a good fit. And, and she'll leave the room and I'll be like, dude, you have nothing in common. And the guy goes, yeah, but she's hot. And these people get married, Justin. And the reason is because their brain is gone and their whole life is driven, as we all are, by our gut, by our, affections, whatever. So anyway, all that to say, the great thing about Christianity is it's a fulfillment of our gut too. It's a fulfillment of that mysterious part of ourselves that's constantly looking for that meaning. And in the parables chapter, I talk about that a lot, about, the reason Jesus, one of the big things Jesus did, he was known, James Dunn talks about this, as a parabolist. From a historical standpoint, what did Jesus do? He told stories all the time. Well, if all he's trying to do is appeal to our reason, just go forget, when you go up the Sermon on the Mount, just spend the weekend, write a systematic, walk it down to us, hand it to us and go, this is what you're supposed to believe. Your ministry will be done in 2 hours, but he doesn't do that. He tells stories about birds and seed and brothers that, hate their dad. And it's like, why is he doing all this? Because he's trying to reframe not just our thinking, but our feeling and the way we live our life and the whole thing. And of course, the paradigm for Christianity in the Gospels is discipleship of Jesus as like your Lord and teacher. And so Christianity gets pitched as not this thing that you can just, hey, you have a different theology than your neighbor, but you still watch Netflix, spend your money, and do your sex life exactly the same as everybody else around you. It's like, that's not Christianity.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the New Testament, So anyway, so I think we need that kind of like, okay, where does the mystery fit in? The mystery fits in. Now I start following Jesus, and he's not physically here. So he's speaking to me through his words, and he's speaking through me through his spirit, and he's, the church and all of these great things. But in the end, you're right. There is a gap.
Yeah.
And I think part of that gap, the brilliance of it is it keeps the heart trending
Yeah.
And it keeps the heart grasping at just that thing. It's just on the edge. You can't quite, you know, and if it was like boom, complete here, done, it'd be like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
it's been so good chatting with you, Mark. Thank you for the time.
Thank you for having me, sir. Appreciate it.
Delightful. I hope to bring you on Unbelievable maybe for a full discussion with the Skeptic at some point. That would be really interesting to do. But for now, this has been a great introduction to the book. It's called The Problem of Jesus, Answering Skeptics' Challenges to the Person of Christ. And we'll make sure there's a link from today's show so you can get hold of it for yourself. All the best as you return to your pastoring, your virtual congregation at the moment.
Yeah, that's right.
Mark.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Great to catch up with you, and we'll see you soon. And if you want to catch this show again, do check it out on podcast, premierchristianradio.com/the profile. And don't forget to get yourself a free sample copy of Premier Christianity magazine, and free sample available, premierchristianity.com/free sample. We'll be back next week with another guest talking about their ministry, life, faith, and walk of witness. For now, thank you very much for being with us, and we'll see you next time.